Montana Territory. Autumn of 1879, the wind howled low across the wheat stubble, and the barn door thudded against its frame as Olivia Wren dropped to her knees in the hay, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. The scent of dust and old timber filled her lungs, but it was the silence that undid her most. No childish laughter. No heavy boots stomping in from the fields, no voice calling her name. Only quiet. And that awful ache that came with it. She pressed her forehead to her hands and cried. Not loud but broken, the kind of cry that came out when a woman had held it too long. Her husband, buried 6 weeks ago beneath a crooked pine near the edge of their land, had been strong once, but the fever took him quicker than they had time to pray. Now it was just her and the land and the weight of 2 small mouths to feed. "Ma," came a soft voice behind her. She turned and wiped at her face. Her son, Samuel, only 5, stood in the doorway, barefoot and holding the edge of his coat closed with one hand. His little sister, Sadie, clung to his side, her thumb in her mouth. "It's all right," Olivia whispered, rising to her feet and pulling them close. "I just needed a moment." But they knew better. Kids always knew. The barn door creaked again, this time with a gust and a voice. "Ma'am," she turned fast, shielding the children behind her. A man stood there, tall, dust-covered, and holding his hat in both hands. His hair was dark and his eyes even darker, set under a brow that looked like it had seen too many hard days. His voice was low, careful. "I am sorry to intrude. Saw the smoke from your chimney and figured someone still lived here." Olivia narrowed her eyes. "What do you want?" The man took a step back, respectful. "Only to ask if you needed help. Name's Callen Easton, been riding from Billings looking for work." Samuel peeked out from behind her skirt. "Are you a cowboy?" Callen cracked the smallest smile. "I suppose I am." Olivia's voice was steady, even though her fingers trembled. "We do not have anything to pay you with." "I do not need much," he said. "Just a place to sleep and a full stomach now and then. I can fix fences, haul wood, break horses if you got any." She stared at him for a long moment. He looked tired but not desperate. Worn down, maybe, but not cruel. And her fences were falling, the barn roof was caving in, and she had not been able to lift the wagon axle alone last week. Olivia nodded once. "You can sleep in the hayloft. There's stew left from supper." Callen tipped his head. "Thank you, ma'am." That night, after the children were tucked into the bed she and her husband once shared, Olivia sat by the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup. Callen sat across from her, his coat draped over the back of a chair, steam rising from his bowl. He did not speak much, just offered a quiet thank you when she handed him bread and looked at the fire like he had lost things too. "Where are you from?" she asked after a long silence. "Southern Wyoming. My folks had cattle near Rawlins, both gone now." She nodded. They did not need to say the rest. Loss had a way of recognizing itself. In the days that followed, Callen worked like he had something to prove. He chopped enough wood to last the winter, repaired the front gate, and helped Samuel build a small corral for the stray goat that wandered in from the hills. He never asked for more than he was given, and he never looked at her like she was weak or pitiful, only like she mattered. "You do not have to do all this," Olivia said one evening as he came in with his arms full of kindling. "I know," he said simply. She watched him move around the cabin, the way he knelt to talk to Sadie about her doll, or lifted Samuel onto the fence rail so he could see the stars better. It was not just the work. It was the way he brought warmth into the cold corners of her home. One afternoon, Olivia found herself standing in the barn doorway again. The sun cast long shadows through the beams, and she remembered that first night, her knees in the straw, her tears soaking the floorboards. Now it was quiet again, but not empty. Callen sat on a hay bale, wiping his hands on a cloth, eyes meeting hers when she stepped inside. He stood quickly. She crossed the barn, her heart thudding hard. "You do not have to keep fixing everything." "I want to," he said. "Not just the fences, I want to help you stand again." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "You already have." He pulled something from his coat pocket then. A small box, scuffed and worn. He held it out, not rushing, not speaking until she took it. Olivia opened the lid. Inside was a simple gold ring. The band was thin but steady, like him. "It belonged to my mother," Callen said, voice rough. "She gave it to me before she passed. Told me to give it to a woman who knew how to fight for her family, a woman who did not quit. I think she meant you." Tears burned her eyes again, but this time they did not twist her chest with grief. They came from somewhere else, somewhere new. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," he said softly. "Say we can make something good from everything we lost." She looked at him, then really looked. At the steadiness of his hands, the kindness in his eyes, the way his presence had filled the emptiness without demanding anything back. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Callen?" He took her hand, slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her close. The barn was quiet but not silent. Somewhere outside, a hawk cried in the sky. And inside, Olivia leaned into him, her head against his chest, her fingers tightening in his shirt. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe, and for the first time ever, she felt chosen. A fine snow dusted the porch rail by dawn, thin as sifted flour. Olivia stepped out quietly, pulling her shawl tighter and watching her breath rise in pale clouds. The sky held to a muted gray, not yet ready to surrender the day. Behind her, the warmth of the hearth still lingered on her skin, but she let the cold settle in her chest a moment longer. It steadied her. Callen was already in the pasture, a spade in hand, clearing out the narrow trench that would carry runoff away from the root cellar. His shoulders moved with slow intention, each step careful along the frozen earth. He hadn't said a word about the ring since that night in the barn, hadn't asked for a decision or pressed for a promise. But he'd stayed. She stepped off the porch and walked toward him, her boots cracking through the frost. When he noticed her, he straightened, brushing dirt from his gloves. "You ought to wait on breakfast," he said, glancing at her bare hands. "Ground's not going anywhere. I already ate," she said, her voice low. "Children are still in their quilts, warm as kittens." He nodded once, then leaned on the spade. "The drain's almost done. Should keep things from freezing up around the door. You think of everything." "I try." They stood quietly for a few beats. A hawthorn tree bent in the distance, its branches stiff with ice. The wind had begun to pick up, slipping past them with a dry whistle. "Samuel asked if you were going to teach him to ride come spring," she said, watching his face. Callen's brow lifted faintly. "He asked, or did he tell you he's already got a horse picked out?" He pointed at the mule and said it would do. That pulled a quiet laugh from him, low and warm. "I'll see what I can do." She stepped closer, brushing a bit of snow from her sleeve. "I've been thinking on what you said, in the barn." He looked at her then, not moving, but something in his expression shifted, open but not expectant. "I never imagined starting again," she said. "Not after. Not after everything." Her words slowed. "But you've built more than fences here." Callen didn't respond at once. He just looked at her like he was memorizing the lines in her face. "I didn't come here looking for a home," he said. "But I found one." She reached for his hand, fingers cold against his glove, and he turned his palm up so their hands fit together. The quiet between them wasn't empty, it carried weight like the hush before a snowfall. "I'll wear the ring," she said. "Not because I'm trying to leave the past behind, but because I want to walk forward with someone who sees it and stays anyway." Callen nodded once, slow and full. "Then we'll walk together." Later that morning, while the sun pushed through the haze and painted the hills in pale gold, Olivia stood at the stove, stirring cornmeal into hot milk while Sadie stacked wooden buttons on the hearth and Samuel worked a puzzle of carved animals on the floor. Callen came in with his coat dusted white and set a pail of water by the door. He didn't speak, just met Olivia's eyes, and she offered a quiet smile. After breakfast, they all walked to the edge of the field where the snow hadn't yet claimed the last of the grass. Callen lifted Sadie onto his shoulders while Samuel ran ahead, chasing a crow that flapped lazily just out of reach. Olivia walked beside him, their steps falling into rhythm. The wind carried the scent of pine and smoke, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf called once before falling silent again. Callen turned toward her as they reached the fence line. There's a man in Townsend, I know he's got a forge and takes on small work. I could hire on part-time if you'd want the extra coin through winter. She considered a moment. Only if it doesn't take you too far from supper. He grinned, not wide but honest. I'll be back before the biscuits cool. They stood there a while, watching the children gather pine cones, the land stretching wide around them. The cabin behind them stood firm against the gray sky, smoke curling from the chimney in a thin, steady line. Olivia reached for his arm, resting her hand lightly in the crook of his elbow. You're not just helping me stand again, Callen. You're helping us all breathe easier. He covered her hand with his, nothing rushed or uncertain. Then I'll keep doing it every day. They walked back together, the path ahead quiet and open, the snow falling soft behind them. The lantern flame flickered low as Olivia stitched along the hem of a calico dress, her fingers moving by feel more than sight. Sadie lay curled on a quilt by the hearth, her breathing soft and even while Samuel rested in the rocker nearby, still clutching the wooden horse Callen had carved him that afternoon. The wind had dropped with the sun, leaving the house wrapped in quiet. Callen stepped through the door, careful not to let the cold sweep in behind him. He unwrapped his scarf and shook the frost from his coat before hanging it on the peg. His boots moved slow across the floorboards, deliberate in the hush. I checked the lower fence, he said, voice low. Couple rails loose, but nothing the snow'll trouble tonight. Olivia tied off her thread and laid the dress aside. You eat while you were out, traded for a slice of pie in town, he said, settling on the bench beside the hearth. Woman at the boarding house had a blackberry jar open. Said it was the last of summer. Olivia leaned back in her chair, hands resting in her lap. What else did she say? He glanced toward her, then to the fire. Asked if I'd settled yet, seemed surprised when I told her yes. She waited a beat. And did she ask where? She did. A pause. I said I was building something with a woman who's not afraid of silence. Olivia smiled faintly, but said nothing. Callen reached to stir the embers with the poker. Man in town mentioned there might be a school starting come spring. Just a small room in the church, but they're looking for someone to help teach letters. She studied him. You think I ought to try? You already taught Samuel his numbers. I figure you'd take to it fine. I've never stood in front of more than 2 people, she said, folding her hands. And I never finished school myself. You listen hard, he said, and you don't talk more than needed. That's better than most. Olivia looked toward the fire, the light catching the gold ring on her finger. I was a girl when I married. Didn't know what I'd be without him. You're not without him, he said. You just grew past the days he could walk beside you, her eyes lifted to his. And you're not looking to fill his place, Callen's voice stayed steady. I'm looking to stand where you'll let me. The door creaked faintly in the wind, but neither of them turned. I've been thinking about building a new chicken coop, she said, voice soft but sure. The old one's barely holding. I can draw a plan, he said. We can build it together, she nodded once. I want it done before the thaw so the hens have somewhere dry. They sat in stillness again, watching the fire burn low. Samuel stirred and mumbled in his sleep, then settled again. Tell me something I don't know, Olivia said, her voice quiet. Callen leaned back against the wall, folding his arms. My father once broke a window trying to shoot a cougar that turned out to be a shadow. Olivia blinked. Did he admit it? Only after Ma made him replace the glass himself, in January. She laughed, the sound hushed but full. That's something? Your turn, he said, tilting his head. She hesitated, then said, When I was 13, I tried to run off to Helena. Thought I'd find work in a bakery. Made it as far as the river before a neighbor spotted me. Did they tell your folks? Before I even crossed the bridge. He gave a low chuckle. And here you are, baking better than any Helena shop. She shrugged. Still burn the crust half the time. I like it that way. She watched him a long moment, taking in the lines around his eyes, the way his jaw settled when he was at ease. He didn't fill the room like her husband once had, with laughter and broad gestures. Callen filled it with steadiness. With weight that held, you said you're settled, she said. But you haven't said what you want next. He looked up at her, not hurried. To see you grow into whatever you choose to be, I'll mend the fences, carry the wood. But I won't keep you from reaching further. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. And if I don't know what I want yet, then I'll wait with you until you do. Sadie stirred on the quilt, and Olivia rose to lift her into her arms. She carried her to the bed, tucked her in beside her brother, and brushed the hair from her brow. When she returned, Callen had added a log to the fire and set her sewing aside. "You tired?" he asked. "No," she said. "Then, not the way I used to be." He stood, moving toward the stove to warm water. "I'll wash the basin before bed." She watched him work, the sleeves of his shirt rolled to the elbow, his forearms flecked with sawdust from the coupe frame he'd started that morning. He moved like he belonged. Not in a loud way, but in the way that mattered. "Come spring," she said, "I'd like to plant a row of apple saplings along the ridge." He didn't turn, just nodded once. "We'll dig them deep so they hold through the wind." She stepped closer, her hand brushing his as he set the pitcher down. "And you'll be here." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She looked up at him then, her hand finding his. "Then we'll plant them together." The thaw came slow that year. By mid-March, the ground softened enough for boots to sink, and the creek beyond the ridge began to run thick with meltwater. The cabin leaned into its second spring with streaks of mud along the steps and wood smoke hanging low in the mornings. Olivia stood at the window, one hand resting on her hip, watching Samuel and Sadie crouched in the garden bed, poking at the earth with sticks. The soil was too wet for planting, but they were restless and she didn't stop them. Callen stepped in from the porch, his collar damp, a rolled canvas in hand. "Surveyor from the town office passed through," he said, setting the canvas on the table. "Left this for anyone thinking of taking up new land." Olivia wiped her hands and unrolled it, eyes scanning the hand-drawn plots. "You looking to claim more?" He leaned on the table beside her, arms crossed loosely. "Only if it's something you'd want. There's a stretch east of the ridge flat, no rock, might be worth growing more than we can hear." She looked at him, then out the window again. "I never thought past this place," she said. "It was all I could hold when everything else left." Callen didn't press, just waited. She brushed her knuckles down the edge of the map. "If we did it, we'd need a second wagon and seed stock. That's more than we've ever risked." He nodded. "I've got a friend in Bozeman with oxen to lend. He'd trade for a full season's hay." Olivia traced a line on the canvas. "That land's near the cottonwoods. I remember picnicking there once before the war came." "Then it's good land," he said. That evening, Olivia carried a basket of mended linens to the loft ladder. Callen had unpacked his bedroll from up there weeks ago, but the space had become a sort of quiet retreat where she'd go when the house felt too full of sound or memory. He was sanding the coupe rail outside, sleeves rolled, the smell of pine dust clinging to his shirt. She stepped out, arms crossed against the breeze. "You ever miss Wyoming?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Sometimes. There was a creek behind our barn where the trout jumped so high you could catch them barehanded if you were fast. You ever think of going back?" He laid the sandpaper aside and turned toward her. "Not since I saw you in the barn door." She held his gaze a beat longer than usual. "I'm not the same woman I was then." "I'd be worried if you were," he said. They moved toward each other slow, like two things shaped by weather meant to meet, but never in a rush. She touched his chest lightly, fingertips just over the buttons of his shirt. "I used to think love was loud," she murmured. "A thing that shouted to be heard." He tilted his head toward her voice. "Sometimes it just holds the door open." The next morning, Olivia asked Samuel to walk with her to the edge of the property. The boy's boots were 2 sizes too large, but he didn't complain as they crunched through patches of lingering frost. "Mr. Easton says we might have more land someday," he said, chin lifted like he already saw it. Olivia smiled faintly. "Would you want that?" "If we had more beans," he said. "And maybe another goat," she nodded. "I think we could manage both." As they turned back, she looked to the ridge where the cottonwoods stood, the tips just budding green. She imagined lines of crops, rows of apple trees stretching in neat arcs. The thought didn't frighten her like it once might have. It felt like breath after a long silence. That night she laid the ring on the table between them. The firelight caught on the band, casting soft gold across the wood grain. "I said yes once," she said, "but I want to say it again. Not just to the ring, to the life." Callen didn't reach for it at first. He looked at her, eyes steady. "Then I'll say it back. Every morning you let me." She slid the ring onto her finger herself, her hands sure. "Come summer, I'd like to be your wife." He reached across and cupped her jaw, his thumb just at her cheekbone. "Then come summer, you will be." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth and something green just beginning to rise. Inside, the fire crackled low, and between them, warmth settled, not rushed, not fleeting, but real. Earned. In the loft above, the linens lay folded, and in the yard, the coop stood ready for hens not yet bought. But inside the cabin, a home was already whole. The morning sky broke in streaks of pale blue and amber, light catching on the dew still clinging to the fence rails. Olivia stood at the basin, sleeves rolled, rinsing the flour from her wrists. The bread dough rested under a cloth on the table, rising slowly in the warmth from the hearth. She heard Callen's boots on the porch before he opened the door, a wrapped parcel tucked under his arm. He set it down gently beside the bowl of dried apples. "From Mr. Ellison's in Townsend," he said. "He said to tell you congratulations." Olivia dried her hands and lifted the corner of the cloth. Inside was a length of soft ivory muslin, finer than anything she'd worn since girlhood. Her fingers traced the edge, quiet settling between them. "I wasn't expecting anything like this," she said. "You'll want something proper for the vows," Callen said. "Even if it's just us and the children under that cottonwood." She folded the fabric back with care. "I'll sew it myself, won't take more than a few evenings." "I know you will," he said. "I just wanted you to have the choice." She looked up at him then, her eyes lingering on the line of stubble along his jaw, the faint scar near his temple she'd come to know. "You always give room to choose," she said. "That's what I never had before." He reached for her hand, thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. "You've made every step your own since I met you." That afternoon, while Callen took Samuel to check the beehive hollows near the creek, Olivia sat with Sadie by the sewing basket. The girl tried to thread a needle with determined fingers, tongue between her teeth, and Olivia guided her hand with a patience that came easy now. "Do you think I'll be pretty when I wear a dress like yours?" Sadie asked. "You already are," Olivia said. "But it's not the dress that makes it so." Sadie considered that, then nodded solemnly and returned to her stitching. The light through the window shifted just enough to make the dust motes glow, and Olivia sat still a moment, watching her daughter carry the quiet with such ease. There was peace in the room. Not from luck, but from labor. The next week, 2 women from the settlement church rode out with baskets of preserves and a folded paper of marriage lines for Olivia and Callen to sign. They didn't linger, but one of them pressed a bundle of wildflowers into Olivia's hands before leaving. "I never knew my mother's name," Olivia said once the door had closed again. "Just her stories." Callen poured her a cup of cider and set it beside her. "Then we'll write a new name to pass on." Under the cottonwoods, the wedding was quiet. The children stood on either side, Sadie holding a small clutch of sage tied with twine. Callen wore a clean shirt, sleeves stiff from lie. Olivia's muslin dress clung gently to her frame, the waist gathered by her own hand. The man from the church read the words slow, letting them settle in the air between each phrase. When Callen lifted her hand, there was no trembling. When Olivia answered, her voice didn't falter. Afterward, they shared bread and honey from the last jar, and Samuel insisted on feeding crumbs to the goat who wandered too close. Olivia laughed, not guarded, not quieted by grief, just full. Later, as dusk fell and the children slept bundled on the quilt near the hearth, Olivia stood at the door, watching the last light slip behind the ridge. Callen came up behind her, arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "This feels like the first breath after holding too long," she said. "We'll keep breathing," he said. One season into the next. In the months that followed, the land east of the ridge was cleared, the stumps burned down, and rows of young apple trees were planted. Olivia took the teaching post in the church, and each morning she walked Samuel and Sadie into town, her books wrapped in oilcloth, her voice steady as she led the children in their letters. Callen rode to Bozeman twice a month, trading hay and tools, always returning before dusk. He built a second room onto the house, not for himself, but so the children would each have space of their own. Olivia chose the curtain fabric. Sadie helped stitch the seams. In summer, bees came to the orchard, and Callen built a set of hives farther from the house. Olivia learned to extract the honey with careful hands, her arms sticky with effort, her laughter rising with the hum of wings around her. Each night they slept close, their hands linked between them, the world quiet around the cabin walls. There were days of hardship, still fences blown down, a crop that yellowed too soon, but they met each one together, not as burden but as bond. One morning in early autumn, Olivia sat on the porch steps, the shawl around her shoulders worn soft. She watched as Callen straightened the last of the apple crates, his hands brushing dust from the lids. He caught her gaze and neither spoke, but the look between them held all that had been built. Not just the home or the trees or the quiet safety, but the choice made each day to stay. To love without question, to endure and grow together, and when he crossed the yard to her, lifting her hand to press it to his chest, Olivia leaned into him with full weight, knowing she would never have to hold herself alone again. Their story never needed to be grand. It only needed to be true. And it was.